Hey, I'm Lino, born and raised here in sunny Southern California. The best place that a carp can actually see is about 1 to 1.5 lengths in front of their head. These are the two methods that I use most. Yeah, I'm so excited to be here, and I'm also a species getter. I love anything on the fly, also. So it's nice to be here. Thank you. Presentation I actually do for a local overshop and fly fishing fairs and club one. So I'm happy to share it with you today. And there's a lot of slides as well, and it's normally an hour-long presentation. So I'll fly through it the best I can. But yeah, so we're going to talk carp today. And so carp, for some reason, have always gotten a bad rap. I don't know why, but especially the LA River carp. They're called sewer salmon, toxic tarpon, mud marlin. So many names. And if you look down there in the center there, I call them golden nuggets because that's really what they are to me. I love carp. I love catching carp. I love the way they look, but they're definitely a precious gem to me. So they seem to be more of a formidable species now that people target all over the world. And I think that's has a lot to do with social media. But this is what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk a little bit about carpology. What I mean by that is I think it's important that with any species you're targeting, you should know a little more about not just what they're eating, but a little more about their anatomy and why things work, the biology, physiology of things. We're going to focus more on the behavior in warm water, but I'll touch a little bit on the seasons, all the seasons from winter, spring, summer, and fall. And then we'll talk a little bit about the strike zone where the fish can see the best. I'll talk about my setups, what rods I like to use. I'll give you a sneak peek into my fly box. We'll talk about the simple rigging systems. I like to keep things super simple. I don't like to be too complicated on the water because I'm constantly changing flies, and you don't want to deal with that. So I think it's best just to keep rigging simple. And then we'll talk about the plan of attack, where I will show you, talk about specific techniques for catching, like the drag and drop technique, use of indicators. I'll also talk about how to identify a carp in its feeding mode, like a tailing carp or a klooping carp, and then how to land the fish. A little anatomy here and physiology. So I'm not going to talk about everything, but I think the most important ones are the barbels, which are the whiskers for starting from the mouth area. You see like the little whisker area. Those are really important to know about because barbels have two functions. One is they have their taste buds. It's kind of like a tongue, but they're good feelers. So if a carp can't taste something, it will feel for it. If it feels like food, they'll go ahead and consume it. And I'll talk a little bit more about that a little bit later in the presentation. But the pectoral fin below that and the pelvic fin, those really, I think just for information, they actually have taste buds on there. So, which is interesting. Fish can actually taste there. But the lateral line, can't see it because the arrows are a little white there, but right there in the lateral line, that's important. That's like a carp's line of defense there. So for example, you're in the river, you step foot in the water. As soon as your foot hits the water, they can pick up on that vibration. And a lot of fish are this way. And they do that by that lateral line. So they know exactly where you're at in the water and if you're coming closer, and they can retreat. But another important thing to know about that lateral line is the fish's ability to detect pressure changes, that in conjunction with their air bladder. So for example, if you hear on the radio that there's going to be a low pressure system, for example, well, carp can actually detect that change in barometric pressure as well. Why? Because the pressure in the air affects the pressure in the water. And so why that's important is, especially for river carp, is that when the carp sense that there's a storm coming through, for example, in the rivers, they tend to gorge because they have the LA River becomes very torrent. So places that I'm fished right now will be like 30 feet underwater when the rainstorms come. So those carp will hunker down. And so they'll gorge before the storm comes because they have no idea how long it'll be before that storm passes. So if you hear on the radio, for example, on a Sunday night that Monday or Tuesday there's going to be a rainstorm, call out sick, get to the river, and start fishing because that's going to be a really good day. So yeah, so that's what you need to know there. Next slide. Now this is really important because especially when you're casting at a carp. So if you look there, you see the two red lines where the blind spots are. Believe it or not, right in front of the fish's face. You don't want to try to put your fly there because they can't see it. And obviously toward the tail, you don't want to cast there. The best place that a carp can actually see is about 1 to 1.5 lengths in front of their head. So that's when you're casting and you want to get a fly, you want to get it right into that binocular high definition section there. Now off to the sides, peripherally, there's low definition. They can't really see it well, but they can detect movement. So I'll talk about how to get their attention, especially when you're using a bait that you drag on the floor, for example. You want to do some quick twitches just to kind of grab the fish's attention, then it'll spin and kind of get it into the binocular vision. And so knowing where the blind spots are, knowing where how the best they can see is really going to help you when making a cast at a carp. The seasons, we're going to go through each one very quickly. I'll focus more on the summer and fall, obviously, but yeah, we can go to the next slide. So this is winter. This is just last Christmas. This is my friend Dinah and I. We were down at the LA River. We decided to have some fun and dress up. This was literally around right around the 25th. And of course, she catches the monster and I catch that little one in the background. But carp in the wintertime become very lethargic because the water is super cold. What's cool though is that they like to huddle. They huddle together to keep warm. So you'll see pods of these carp just kind of sitting in the current. And what you want to do is you want to get upriver from them, which is what I call force feeding. And you want to send your fly down to them. Just let the fly drift right into their faces and do it over and over until you manage to trick one into taking your fly. And so you want to use weightless flies with an indicator. That's the best way to do it in the wintertime for me. Springtime, my absolute favorite time of the year to get there out on the river because everything comes alive. The picture in the background there, you see some thrashing carp. That's what it looks like when they spawn. Don't bother casting at them because that's what they're just having fun doing their thing. I mean, they're in orgy mode right there. So they're out there doing their spawn. Will have nothing to do with your fly. So, and you don't want to harass them anyway. So when you see carp thrashing in the springtime, just let them do their thing and stay away. There are, however, a lot of big, hungry pre-spawn fish that you can find. And you'll see the picture there, my friend Kesley at Steely Chick. Those are 2 IGFA line class record carp that she caught within a half an hour apart at the LA River a few years back. And so that's why I like, and then at the bottom left corner there, that's me with my largest LA River carp, which is around 18 pounds or so, and all caught in the springtime. So springtime on the rivers are really a great time to be on the water. You want to fish early or late. A lot of algae in the river. Overnight, the algae sort of settles down, and then in the morning when you're there, there's no algae on the surface. But as soon as that sun peeks up over the hill or beyond the trees, all that algae rises to the surface to follow the sun, and then it makes it difficult to cast. So get out there early, and springtime is so fun because you can catch a heck of a lot of fish in the spring. So summertime, and here we are, lots of tailing fish in the summertime. And the pictures you see there, you can see the fish with their head down in the ground and their tail sticking up. They like to go really shallow. And these are fun. This is a really fun time of the year because you can actually sneak up on these fish and put their fly like right in their face and watch them eat it, which is pretty cool. And that's we'll talk about dapping later, and that's a technique you want to use there. And then the pictures to the side, when the fish come up to the surface to eat, in the summertime there tends to be a lot of foam on the surface, a lot of scum lines, and in that foam you have ants and mosquitoes and bugs that get trapped in it, and the carp will actually come up and just start to eat the looks like they're eating foam, but really what they're doing is eating the bugs and stuff inside the foam. And obviously in the summer you want to fish early because it's the heat is not good for any species. Luckily, carp can actually handle the heat pretty well, but you still want to take a picture of the fish in the shade, take your picture and release the fish as quickly as possible. But they are very, very hardy. So that's why they feed in the 100-degree temperature in the really skinny water. They just don't seem to care. They don't seem to mind it. So These pictures here, especially like Andy and Nicole, those were just caught recently. A few years back, I got the chance to fish with Jimmy Kimmel and Adam Perry Lang up there, which was cool. They both hooked up. Adam caught some, but Jimmy unfortunately lost all that he hooked up to. And then my friend Luce caught it like on the first cast, which is great. So you can go to the next slide. Fall, we're still dealing with warm water. And what's interesting about fall is the juveniles from the spring hatch all get big enough to catch. So you have a very good chance of catching a lot of fish, but they're going to be small. And the most fish I caught in one session on the river is 45 carp in one day. But it was, the fish averaged from like 5 inches to like 15 inches. So just a lot of fun. And the only problem there is when you're targeting the big ones, because that lateral line I was telling you about, as soon as you step foot in the water, those little ones scurry and they will scare everything away. So it's kind of hard to target them sometimes, but just be patient and you'll get the big ones. On these fish here in the pictures, they're all caught in the fall. All right, what does my setup looks like? I generally go between a 6 weight and a 7 weight. Those are the rods that I use mainly for these carp. And it really doesn't matter how big the fish are. They can get up to even 30 pounds and I'll still use a 6 or 7 weight. And I'll talk about the battle part of it later. But what's really important about the setup is I think it's important to always have a reel, invest a little bit more just to get a reel that's smooth and has sealed drags, because the worst thing you can do is drop your reel in the sand, and then your reel is ruined. And it's very easy to drop your reel into the sand. So try to get a one that's sealed. And then floating line across the board is what you want to use. Rio Gold and the Rio Grande is the two my preference in terms of floating line. And then you can adjust your leader accordingly. But generally the fish you're going to be targeting are going to be shallow. So it's important to use a floating line. And then I also do a lot of Tenkara, especially in the summer. And if you're not familiar with Tenkara, basically it's just a stick, string, and a fly. Originated in Japan over 200 years ago. Tenkara is important, especially in the summer, or even with your traditional fly fishing. You want to step up on your leaders and try to land that fish quickly as possible. Getting them in sooner and releasing them sooner is better than playing that fish to exhaustion, especially in the heat. Tenkara is a straight tug of war. There's no reel on it, and but you can present your fly delicately. You don't have to deal with line management because there's no fly line. It's just a straight line directly to the rod. And then you can see in the picture here, he's demonstrating a power curve. That's basically just utilizing the backbone of the rod and letting the tip act as the sort of the drag and to tire the fish. But with Tenkara, you generally can get a fish in pretty quickly, and the battle is fierce in the beginning. But once you get them to that point, you can pretty much get them in pretty quickly. So that's a lot of fun. These are the first point there is the connecting knots. These are the knots that I think you should just YouTube and know. The perfection loop, and that's connecting the fly line to the fly. I'm sorry, your leader to the fly line. If you have a loop-to-loop connection. If you don't, then you want to know how to do an Albright or a nail knot. And then you want to learn how to do small loop knots. Loop knots are very important in terms of allowing your fly to move naturally, but tying a really small one's even better, because for me, the small loop knot, I've had longer ones get caught up in the hook, but the one that's really annoying to me is when the algae gets caught up in between the big loop. I hate that. So if you make smaller knots, less algae gets caught up inside that loop. So those are the ones that you should know. I'll talk a little bit about the simple systems in the next slide, and how to connect mono to fluoro, and then the importance of tippet rings, and then cider systems, the use of indicators and whatnot. So these are the two methods that I use most of the time. If you see here, starting from left to right on the top diagram, method 1 there, the white there is the fly line, and then most fly lines have a loop at the end of it. You want to learn how to do it, a perfection loop there. And then I use, for the leader portion, I use about 3 to 4 feet in length of a colored mono. Reason why I like it colored is because I want to be able to see it. So it's a way of detecting strikes. You can focus on that portion of it, and you can detect the line moving sideways or even twitching when a fish takes in the fly. And then from there, I'll connect it to a tippet ring, and that's an 1/8 inch, usually around an 1/8 inch tippet ring, and you can just attach those by clinch knots, and then your tippet will be 3 to 6 feet of fluoro connected directly to your fly. This system here is really good because you can just, most of the time, the part that's going to break is the weakest spot, which is the low test line, which is the 3 to 6 feet of fluoro, and then you can just change that piece right there over and over again. You don't have to worry about the mono section. So that makes that really simple and really fast to change when you need to. And then the bottom one method too, a lot of times you'll see me using a green eggs and ham fly under an indicator at the river, and I change them so quickly because there's so many snags in the water. I realized that what you want to do is just tie a perfection loop, do one straight 5-foot piece. So generally the rule of thumb is that depending on the depth and the leader length, you want to go 1.5 to 2 times the depth of the river. I just keep it at straight 5 because the deepest point for me is around 4.5 to 5 feet in the sections that I'm fishing at. So that leader will cover all depths. But you'll notice there that strike indicator, and then on the next slide I'll talk about my favorite one, but you want to attach the indicator right where the loop knot is. And the reason why is when you go to set the hook and you're swinging for the fences, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. A lot of the indicators on the market will tend to slide down the line. So if you attach your indicator above the knot to the connection point, and then it won't slide down. My favorite all-time indicator is the Airlocke strike indicator, the one in my hand there, the 1/2 inch. 1/2 inch, you can cast it as if it's not even there, or like it's cork. You go to the 1/2 inch, the 3/4 to the 1 inch, it's hard to cast. But the 1/2 inch in pink and orange seem to be my favorite color in terms of visibility. And then you don't have to worry about crimping your line. It holds on nicely. It won't crimp the line. And it detects the most subtle of bites. And you see here, carp have rubbery lips. And we're using the green eggs and ham that I tie as size 12 hooks, sometimes 14 even. And you see that, put that little note there, swings are free. So when you see that indicator twitch or move any way, if you think it's a bite, I want you to swing for the fences. The goal is to get that indicator, throw it out of the water and get it behind you. Okay, so you can be swinging all day long. But because carp, as I was talking about before, when they find food on the bottom, they're taking it in and then they're spitting it out once they realize it's fake. And it happens like this. So if you see that strike, you want to set the hook right away, and then that's going to increase the odds of you catching fish. And for me, especially when using egg type patterns like the eggs and ham, I mean, it increased my hook ratio using an indicator. So I know a lot of people frown on using indicators. I have no idea why. I get a lot of heat on Instagram for it. I have no idea why, but indicators really will increase your odds of catching. And then Tenkara, the setup is similar to the traditional, except you have my Tenkara rod is 13.5 feet long. At the end of the Tenkara tip, there's what's called a Lillian, and that's just like a braid material with a knot on it, where you would just basically tie on your mono to it, and with a hitch knot, and it'll stay. And then you want to use 9 to 10 feet of a bright material, same thing, tippet ring, and then 3 to 4 feet of 10-pound fluoro. The total length of the leader, I like it to be about 1 foot to 2.5 feet or 2 feet beyond the length of the rod. So that's my Tenkara setup. And then next slide. These are my flies, and you see on the left side, eggs and ham. Green eggs and ham are my favorite. The green, red work really well. Carp can see red very well, and white, a very close second in terms of the color. But the green one is my favorite. What's interesting about that is I used to tie these flies without the chenille tail, and if you look carefully, you can see some chenille tail on the end of it. That chenille tail made all the difference in the world. They just seem to like it better than just a straight egg. So adding that little chenille tail is important. right in the center there, you see the eggs and ham hybrid, and that's one that with the dumbbell eyes, the bead chain eyes, and that's for dragging on the bottom. But that chenille tail will stick up in the air, and the carp can feel it with those little barbels that I was telling you about, so they'll take it in. And then the nugget bugs there in the end there, that's just, I mean, you could see the rubber legs. I leave them free because those things will move around, and the carp feel that with their tentacles, and I mean on their barbels, and they will just suck that fly right in. So flies made like that, especially like that's my nugget bug, I call it, and caught a lot of big fish with that one. All right, how to access. Now this is just, I just threw it in here because it's a funny story because there's a spot in the LA River where I take a lot of people, and as we're walking out to the water, I kind of trick them into thinking that we have to go through this long, dark tunnel, but really it's just a joke. But not for Heather. She wanted to go straight in there. She was all for it. It seemed to scare her, but most people have this look on their face like, what? So anyway, once you get to the river, this is what you want to look for. You want to look for tailing fish. Those are, again, the fish that are actually feeding, and you can actually see with their faces down and their tail sticking up, sometimes out of the water. The cloopers are the ones on the surface, and you can use dry flies. Parachute Adams are really a popular fly to use there. And then the cruising fish, I don't really pay attention too much to the cruising fish. I think what's important about there is that you kind of watch them and see where they're going, but I have a hard time catching a fish cruising. I have, but it's a low percentage shot. You want to wait for them to get to where they're going and wait for them to start clooping or tailing, and then start throwing at them. You want to look for bubble trails. Oh, that came in black, but bubble trails are important because when you can't see the fish feeding, if you see lines of trails, bubble trails, carp farts, I call them, you can tell which direction they're going because there's no mistake. You'll see the trail of bubbles and which way they're heading. You can kind of pick them off, throw in front of them. Breaching fish, like you see in this picture here. If you see a lot of breaching fish, be patient, stick it out. They are exerting a lot of energy, and they breach for two reasons. One is just to adjust their air bladder, and two, because they like to have fun. They're just having fun breaching, but they exert a lot of energy and they're going to get hungry. So just be patient and stick it out. And then the plan of attack. So dapping, again, dapping is when you can see a fish feeding, you can sneak up on them. You're using a short line. You don't have to cast. You're just dropping that fly a head length in front of them, and just wait for them to see it, and then they'll take it. Now, when you see tailing fish further out and you have to make a cast, what you want to do is you want to cast past the fish. As soon as the fly hits the water, you want to lift your rod tip, drag it toward the fish, and then drop it right into that strike zone that I was talking about. That's called the drag and drop. And most of the time, as soon as the fly hits the water and they see it, the carp will take it. And then we talked a little bit about indicators. That's probably 80% of the time I'm going to be using a strike indicator on a river system. And then the indicator doesn't have to be an airlock. You can also fish a dry hopper, especially in the summer right now. You can do a hopper dropper where you have the floating hopper as your indicator basically, and then below that the eggs and ham. So that's a great deadly combination there. And then force feeding to me is being way up river, letting the indicator drift all the way down river. So if you know a pot of fish is there, get way up river, let the fly. That way you're not spooking them, and you can just do it over and over. You can do a series of reach mends where you don't even cast. You just lift it up, bring that indicator toward you, and then drop it again and let it go over and over until the fish hits. Don't worry about the weight of the rod. So if you're down at the river and all you have is a 5-weight, you can land 20-pound fish on a 5-weight. You just basically have to point the rod at the fish, keep it low, utilize the backbone of the rod. The fish doesn't know a difference between a 5-weight and a 10-weight. But utilize the backbone of that rod, and you'll be able to land a fish no problem with a 5-weight. I've even done it with 3 weights. Yeah, just maintain that side pressure and utilize the backbone of the rod, and yeah, you'll get that fish in pretty quickly like that. And then with Tenkara, this is just a couple of weekends ago. With the Tenkara, you are maintaining that constant pressure with what's called a power curve, and it's basically just letting the bend of the rod, and you'll feel all the force right where your hand is, where the butt of the rod is, and it is a tug of war. and so much fun. And what you're trying to do though to tire that fish out quickly is to get them to come up to the surface and sip air. Once that carp gets to the surface and you see their mouth come out of the water, each time it does that, it's kind of like a gut punch. You know, the air just gets sucked out of them, and then all of a sudden they get tired very quickly. So that's why you see me here in this picture keeping that rod tip really high. And this particular carp came up so quickly that it jumped out of the water like a bass. But I was able to get this fish in just a matter of a few minutes, just because I was able to pull them out of the water. And it was a big, like a 12-pound fish. So Tenkara is a lot of fun. And this is what it's all about for me. I just love to get out there and introduce folks to fishing. I am not a guide. I love to use guides. I'm totally endorsing guides, but for me, it's the reward and is not in payment, but in just watching the smiles and everyone's faces. And thanks to social media, everyone that I've fished with, I've met on Instagram, and you can just see the smiles on their faces and catching their first carp on the fly. And so if you're ever in the LA area and you want to try something challenging and something unique, don't feel free to reach out. And if our schedules work out, I'll take you down to the river and we'll go catch some carp.